Jake came home early that day because of a sudden power outage at the training center where he worked. He was tired and just wanted to lie down, but when he reached his small apartment, something felt strange. The building was too quiet even for a weekend. The hallway lights were flickering and he could hear a low humming sound coming from inside his shared room with his alien roommate. Lara was not a normal roommate. She was an exchange student from a planet called Xylan. Her skin had a soft glow like moonlight, and her voice was calm and musical. She never caused trouble and mostly stayed in her section of the room, reading strange alien books or talking to her plants, which responded to her in ways Jake never understood. Jake called out softly from outside her door, but there was no answer. He knocked once, then twice. The humming sound grew louder. It didn't sound like any machine. He felt uneasy and thought maybe she was hurt or needed help. He gently pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. What he saw inside froze him on the spot. Lara was floating in the middle of the room, her eyes closed, her arms spread out, symbols glowing across her skin and hovering in the air like floating glass. She was surrounded by a field of light that pulsed gently with each of her breaths. It was not electricity or technology. It was something ancient, something alive. Jake stepped back, but the floor creaked. Lara's eyes snapped open and glowed with blinding white light. She gasped in shock, and the floating symbols exploded into dust around her. Her body dropped to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. Jake rushed forward. He didn't think twice. He just acted. He grabbed her shoulder to see if she was breathing. The moment he touched her, a surge of energy shot through his body. His heart raced, his mind flooded with strange visions, alien landscapes, burning skies, voices in a language he couldn't understand. His knees gave out and he collapsed beside her, gasping for air. Then everything went quiet when Jake opened his eyes again. Lara was looking at him, her hand on his chest, her eyes no longer glowing but different. They were darker, deeper, full of fear and something else, something like regret. She whispered his name slowly, as if testing if he was really there. Jake tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He finally asked, "What just happened? What was all that light? What was she?" Lara stood up slowly, her legs shaking. She didn't answer right away. She walked to the window and stared out at the dark sky. Then she turned back to him and said something he didn't expect. "You weren't supposed to see that." Jake felt his stomach drop. He asked what she meant and why he was feeling dizzy and strange. She looked down as if ashamed and said the ritual was not meant for human eyes. It was something sacred, something forbidden even among her own kind. She was trying to stop something inside her, something that had been forced on her since birth. Jake tried to stand, but stumbled. She helped him to the bed and he sat down, still shaking. He asked again what she meant by ritual and why he felt like his skin was burning from the inside. Lara said the truth, quietly, as if each word hurt her. The light was part of an ancient bond ritual, something her people used to control powers inside certain bloodlines, but she ran away from that fate and came to Earth, hiding from those who wanted to use her. She was trying to sever the last link tonight, but his presence changed everything. Jake stared at her, confused. What did his presence have to do with anything? She looked at him with pain in her voice and said, "Because you touched me while the symbols were active. Now the bond is shared. You are part of it. Now we are connected." Jake couldn't believe it. He said he didn't ask for this. He just wanted to make sure she was okay. She nodded and said she knew, and that's what made it worse. The bond responds to intention, not just blood. His desire to help her open the path. Now they were both caught in something neither of them fully understood. Outside, thunder rumbled, but there were no clouds. Jake looked down at his hands. They were shaking. Faint lines of light were dancing under his skin, like veins of silver. Lara said she would try to fix it, but time was short now that the bond was activated. Someone would sense it. Someone would come. He asked who. She said her pursuers, the ones who marked her, the ones who never forgive broken bonds. Jake looked at her, then back at the door that was still wide open. His normal life was now gone, and he didn't even know why, but deep down he knew this was just the beginning. Something had been awakened, and it was coming for both of them. Jake could not sleep that night. His body felt strange, like something was moving inside his veins. A soft glow under his skin refused to fade, and the air around him felt heavy, like it was pressing against his chest. He turned again and again on his bed, trying to forget the images of Lara floating in the air, glowing like a living star, whispering in a language that was not meant for human ears. When morning came, he found her sitting on the floor of her side of the room, surrounded by her alien books. and humming to a small blue plant that opened its petals only when she sang. She did not look at him, she did not speak. Jake walked over slowly and asked her again what had happened last night and why he felt like his heart was not his own anymore. Alara said nothing for a long time, then whispered that the bond was deep now, and his presence had changed her more than she expected. He asked what that meant, and she said the ritual was old, forbidden, and dangerous, meant only for those who carried the bloodline of the High Keepers of Zyerland. It was not magic, it was memory energy passed down from ancestors to their children, but she rejected it years ago. She did not want to be used as a vessel. Jake sat down across from her, trying to understand. Her eyes were no longer glowing, but deep and sad. She told him that when he touched her in the middle of the ritual, his intentions merged with hers and the bond accepted him as a second host. Now their fates were tied. Jake said he didn't believe in fate, and he didn't sign up for any of this. He just saw her collapse and acted like any decent person would. She nodded and said, that is why the bond accepted you, because your heart moved without command. He stood up, frustrated, asking what happens now. How do they break this bond? How does he get back to normal? She said it was not that simple. The bond cannot be broken by force. It must either complete or fade over time, but if left incomplete, it will attract attention, unwanted attention. Jake asked who would notice, and she looked away, saying the Watchers, the keepers of the code, those who hunt the broken lines. They can sense a live bond in the wrong world. He asked what they would do, and she said they would erase the mistake completely. Meaning him too. Jake stepped back, trying to process her words, his hands glowing faintly with the same pulsing light as before. He looked around their small room, suddenly feeling like a cage instead of a home. That day, everything changed for him. When he stepped outside, people looked at him for too long. Machines around him glitched, his phone screen cracked without warning, and birds flew in strange patterns above his head. He returned to the room and told Alara what happened. She looked concerned and asked if he felt anything else. He said yes. Sometimes he could hear people's thoughts, but only as a whisper, like a dream. Not yet awake, she told him that was the beginning. The bond was unlocking parts of him to match her link, and soon he would see things he should not see. Jake said this was insane. He was just a normal guy, not some chosen hero. She smiled for the first time and said neither was she once. That night, Jake heard whispers again, but this time not from humans. Outside their window, a small black sphere floated silently, its surface shifting like liquid metal. It was watching them, recording something. He pointed, and Alara jumped to her feet. Her hand glowed with soft white fire, and the sphere vanished in a flash of light. She stood still, breathing hard, saying it was already happening. They had found her. Jake asked who, and she said the ones who created the code, the old council of Zyerland. The ones who wanted her as a vessel and now wanted him gone before he changed too much. He said they needed to run. She shook her head and said running would not help now. The bond was active. They would track its energy across space itself. The only way out was to complete the bond and rewrite it from the source. Jake asked how, and she said they must go back to her world, to the place where it all began, to the Temple of Silent Lights, where the first code was carved into crystal. Jake looked at her and asked if they had time. She said maybe a few days, maybe less. He packed his bag quietly, unsure what to believe, unsure who he was becoming, but one thing he knew: he was not letting her face this alone, not after what he saw, not after what they had started together. The night sky looked quiet, but Jake felt the storm inside his chest every time he blinked. He saw flashes of light, not from the room, but from somewhere else, like distant memories that were not his own. His hands tingled when he touched metal, and his ears picked up sounds from behind the walls, whispers that should not exist. He tried to act normal, to eat, to breathe, to sleep, but everything had changed, and Alara knew it till she sat on the edge of her bed holding one of her glowing books, turning pages that looked like glass with symbols dancing across them. Her eyes did not blink, her voice silent for hours. Then she finally spoke and said the Watchers were near. Now she could feel their attention, pressing down from far above. Jake asked what they wanted. She said control and silence. They wanted her back and him gone before the bond changed him forever. He asked what exactly the bond was doing to him, and she said it was rewriting his energy gently, slowly, carefully. It was making him more like her, not in form, but in essence, in thought, in presence, in spirit. He laughed nervously and said he still felt human, and she looked at him sadly, saying for now. The next day, everything around him got worse. Machines stopped when He walked by elevator doors open before he pressed a button. The streetlight shattered above him without a reason, and a cat followed him home but hissed and ran away. The moment it looked into his eyes, he returned to the apartment and told Alara everything. She nodded and said the bond was not hiding anymore. It was blooming. It was searching for its balance, and because he was resisting, the symptoms were stronger. That evening, a package arrived outside their door. No label, no delivery person. Alara picked it up and told Jake to step back. She opened it slowly. Inside was a black orb like the one they saw outside, but this one was cracked, leaking blue mist, and inside the mist floated a message not written in words but in moving symbols that rearranged into Alara's name, then Jake's name, then one word in English. Terminate. Jake's heart dropped. He looked at Alara and asked what it meant. She said the Watchers had decided he was a threat and were sending a cleansing unit to erase the error. Jake shouted that they needed to hide, and she said no, not hide, prepare. The next morning, Alara drew a symbol on the floor, using dust from her planet mixed with his sweat and her tears. It glowed softly, and when she placed her hand in the center, the room bent around them. For 1 second, everything went silent, like time had paused. Then the lights flickered, and she said the bond was now cloaked for a short time. They had maybe 2 days. Jake asked what they were supposed to do in 2 days, and she said train, not in fighting, but in understanding, because the bond was alive and it listened. And if he didn't understand it, it would break him from the inside. So she began to teach him how to calm his thoughts, how to hear energy, how to feel the language of things not spoken. He sat in the center of the room, closed his eyes, and followed her voice. She sang a soft tune, one she learned as a child, and the walls disappeared in his mind. He saw her memories not through images, but through feelings: the pain of exile, the fear of being hunted, the loneliness of sleeping under red moons, and the hope she placed in him without knowing when. He opened his eyes. He was crying, and she wiped his tears and said the bond had accepted him more than she expected, and that scared her because it meant the change was permanent now. That night he dreamed of a place filled with crystal towers, floating above oceans of light, a temple with silent lights where voices hummed in harmony, and a single door stood waiting for him. Alara said it was not a dream, but a vision, the bond showing him the path ahead. Next evening, he stepped out for fresh air and saw a man across the street staring at him, not blinking, not moving, just watching. Jake looked away, then looked back, and the man was gone. He rushed inside and told Alara. She said they had found him not through light or sound, but through fear. They followed fear, like sharks followed blood. Jake asked what to do. She said they needed to leave now, tonight, through the old gate she had sealed when she first arrived on Earth. It would take them halfway to the temple, but the journey after that would be dangerous and long. Jake packed nothing but a jacket and a photo of his family. He looked around the room one last time. This place that was once normal now felt like a memory already fading. Alara opened the gate, a ring of light beneath their feet pulsing faster and faster. The floor melted away, revealing a tunnel of stars and cold wind. Jake grabbed her hand and asked if they would survive, and she said only if they trusted the bond completely. They jumped together into the unknown. They landed hard on the other side, not on a planet, not in a city, but in the middle of a vast forest filled with tall trees that glowed faintly in the dark. The sky above was not black, but deep purple, and stars moved slowly as if drifting through water. Jake struggled to stand. The air was heavy and smelled like burning leaves, but Alara helped him up, her hands shaking not from fear, but from memory. She said this was the halfway gate once used by ancient travelers. Before the council closed all the paths, it connected the human world to the outer rim of Zyerland. Not many used it now, and that made it safe for a while. Jake looked around but saw no signs of buildings or people, just strange plants humming low like sleeping animals. They walked for what felt like hours, moving through twisted paths and under branches that opened for Alara like they remembered her touch. Jake kept close, his skin still glowing dim under his jacket, and every step made the ground whisper his name. He tried not to listen, but the bond was alive inside him, and growing. Suddenly they heard a loud crack in the sky and looked up. A bright light shot down like lightning, but not from clouds. It was a pod, metallic and fast, landing deep in the forest with a thundering crash. The trees shook and the ground split slightly beneath their feet. Alara went pale and said they had found them faster than expected. Jake asked who, and she said retrieval guards, the first wave sent by the council. Their job was not to ask questions, only to retrieve or erase. They ran through the trees, moving faster now, but the forest began to shift around them as if responding to the approaching threat. Paths closed behind them, leaves turned black, and the humming stopped. Alara said the forest feared them too soon. They reached a clearing and saw the pod standing like a scar on the earth. 3 tall figures stepped out, dressed in armor that shimmered like oil, their faces hidden behind masks shaped like skulls. Each carried a staff that buzzed with energy. Alara stepped forward and told Jake to stay behind her. She raised her hand and called out in her language, a warning, a plea, and a challenge. The guards did not answer. They lifted their staffs and fired bolts of light at them. Alara blocked one with a wall of force, but the second struck the ground near Jake, sending him flying. He rolled across the dirt, gasping from the impact, his body tingling with heat, the bond flaring in defense. He saw Alara fight with grace and fury, her hands moving like waves, her energy forming shields and blasts, but she was outnumbered. One guard got behind her and raised his staff to strike. Jake, without thinking, raised his arm, and a burst of silver light shot out, blasting the guard back into a tree, which shattered from the impact. Alara looked at him in shock, her eyes wide. She said he was not supposed to be able to do that, not yet, not without training. Jake stood, breathing hard, not knowing what he had done, just that it came from inside, like the bond had acted on its own to protect her. The guards regrouped and came again, faster, stronger. One grabbed Alara by the arm and tried to teleport, but she screamed and resisted. The bond flared between them, and Jake saw her pain, felt her fear. He ran forward and tackled the guard, breaking the link and sending them both crashing to the ground. Alara's hands burned with light, and she unleashed a wave of force that knocked all 3 guards back. But this time, something changed. Her body lifted off the ground, and her hair floated like it was underwater. Glowing symbols appeared on her skin, again brighter, more alive than before. The forest responded. 2 trees bent, wind roared, and the sky cracked with thunder. She cried out a single word, and the ground split open beneath the guards, swallowing them into a deep pit that sealed instantly, as if they were never there. The pod behind them exploded in a burst of white fire and silence. Followed, Alara collapsed to her knees, and Jake rushed to her, catching her before she hit the ground. Her skin was hot and her breath shallow, but she was alive. She whispered that she used too much and that the bond was now fully awake within her. And him. Jake held her and asked if more were coming. She nodded weakly and said, yes, they always send more, and next time it would not be guards, but hunters, those who feel nothing and destroy everything. They rested there for a few hours, the forest slowly healing around them, the leaves turning green again, the wind softening. Jake sat beside her, watching the stars above, feeling the bond pulse gently like a second heartbeat. He was not afraid anymore, not because he was strong, but because he was not alone. Alara opened her eyes and smiled, saying they still had a chance if they reached the Temple of Silent Lights before the council did. Jake said they would get there no matter what. The night grew colder, but Jake did not feel it. His body still hummed with the strange energy from the bond, and his mind would not stop replaying the battle in the clearing. He could still see the flash of light, the twisted trees, the way Alara rose into the air like a star breaking through darkness. He had never believed in magic, but this was something older, deeper, more real than anything he had ever imagined. Adela rested beside him, her breathing soft, her skin pale and marked with faint, glowing lines. He watched her carefully, not as an alien, not as a roommate, but as someone who had risked everything to protect him, even when it meant burning herself from the inside. He had questions, 1,000 of them, but they could wait, because right now she just needed him to stay close. When morning came, she stirred slowly, her voice weak but steady. She said, they could not stop, not now, not when the hunters would already be searching their energy trail. Jake asked how much farther the temple was. She said 2 days through the shifting valley, a place where nothing stayed the same, not the land, not the sky, not even the memories. It touched Jake, helped her up, and they moved forward, the forest behind them fading into mist, the path ahead bending like water under heat. The trees became glass towers, then melted into stone arches, then turned to smoke that shimmered with colors that had no names. Jake struggled to walk. Each step felt like sinking into a dream, but Alara held his hand and sang a song that kept their minds sharp, a song her mother had taught her before she was taken by the council. They camped near a floating rock island that hovered just above the ground, and Jake asked if she ever thought about giving Up, she looked at the stars and said every day, but every day she remembered what giving up had already cost her family, her planet, her chance to choose her own fate, and now this bond, something fragile and beautiful that might still save them. Both Jake asked what would happen if they reached the temple, what completing the bond would actually mean. Alara hesitated, then explained the temple held the original code. The first light written in the language of all living things it could be. Used to rewrite the bond, make it safe, make it stable, or if they failed it could destroy them both completely. Mind and soul burned into the fabric of the universe like a scar that never healed. He was quiet after that, staring into the strange sky, where clouds moved like fish swimming through light. He thought about home, about Earth, about his sister who always left the porch light on, about the books he would never finish and the pizza place he would never visit again if this journey ended badly. But then he looked at Alara and knew he could not leave her, not now, not ever. That night the dreams returned stronger, clearer. He stood in the temple doors, open wind swirling around him, and inside he saw himself and Alara not as they were, but as beings made of light, their hands touching, their minds open, their hearts one. It felt like peace, it felt like fire, it felt like truth. When he woke up, Alara was already up, eyes scanning the horizon. She said the valley was near, and once they entered, they would be tested not by guards or hunters, but by the bond itself. It would show them what they feared, what they wanted, what they never admitted, even to themselves, and only if they passed would the temple reveal its true form. Jake nodded and said he was ready, not because he was brave, but because walking away was no longer possible. They stepped into the valley and the world changed instantly. The sky shattered into mirrors. The ground turned into memory flashes of childhood fears. Broken dreams, lost moments playing out like theater around them. Jake saw his father leaving his best friend, crying his own reflection, shaking with doubt. Alara saw fire falling from the sky, her people begging her to stay, her younger self locked in a crystal chamber while council members watched without feeling. She tried to scream, but no sound came, only silence and shame. They walked through it together, holding hands, sharing strength, each memory trying to pull them apart, but the bond kept them moving forward. And then the illusions faded, and they saw it at last, the temple rising from the earth, made of crystal and light, surrounded by silence and wind. The door stood open as if waiting for them. Alara turned to Jake and asked one last time if he was sure he wanted this, and he said, I could not leave you like that, not when everything in me says we were meant to finish this together. The crystal temple did not have doors like earth buildings. Instead, it opened like a blooming flower, each petal glowing with soft white light. And as Jake and Alara stepped inside, the walls shifted around them, showing images from lives they had never lived, futures they had not chosen, and moments frozen in time like memories carved into glass. Jake felt weightless, not in body but in thought, as if the temple had reached inside his mind and lifted every doubt, every fear, every hope, and laid them bare. Alara walked ahead, her feet touching the floor that responded with soft ripples of light. Each step a language, each breath a signal to the code buried deep within the temple. She told Jake this was the heart of her world, not the cities or towers or spaceships, but this place where truth lived and where destiny could be rewritten if the code accepted their bond. Jake asked what would happen if it did not, and she looked at him not with fear, but with a strange calm, and said, then we become dust and light and join the stars that never speak again. They reached the inner chamber, a space that did not have walls or ceiling, just endless sky above and a platform floating in the center, where the source pulsed with quiet power, a sphere of shifting light wrapped in ancient symbols older than any spoken word. Alara reached out, and the bond inside her answered, glowing bright across her skin, and Jake felt it too, his heartbeat syncing with hers, his hands glowing like fire trapped under glass. He stepped forward, and the source reacted, spinning faster, lights dancing around them, and the air filled with a hum that made his bones vibrate. Alara placed her hand on the source and nodded for Jake to do the same. He hesitated only for a moment, then reached out and touched it. Everything vanished. He stood not in the temple, but in a space between, moments where time held no meaning and space had no direction. He was alone until he saw her, not Alara as she was, but as a child crying in a dark room with voices shouting outside, then as a young girl begging the council to let her choose her path, then as the Alara he knew, fighting against fate with fire in her eyes and sorrow in her voice. Then He saw himself lost, confused, dreaming of stars, and finding none until this a voice filled the space, not a voice of sound, but of feeling, asking one question: do you accept, not because of power or fear or destiny, but because you choose her? Jake did not speak. He simply opened his arms, and the bond inside him flared so bright the shadows broke and the temple returned. They stood in the chamber, the source now still, its light soft and warm. Alara was crying, not from pain, but from something deeper, something like relief. She said the code had accepted them. Their bond was no longer a danger. It was a new path, a new story in the language of the universe. But the moment of peace shattered when the sky above them cracked with thunder, and a ship darker than space itself descended through the light. The council had arrived not to judge, but to end what they could not control. Dozens of hunters stepped out, armor shining like void, their faces hidden behind emotionless masks, and their weapons humming with the power to erase minds and crush worlds. The lead hunter raised his arm and pointed at Jake and Alara without speaking, and the others moved forward. Alara said there was no time to run, and Jake said they were not running anymore, not from this, not from truth, not from what they had become. He stepped forward, raised his hand, and the bond answered, not with violence, but with light. A shield rose around them, pure and strong, powered by unity. Not anger the hunters attacked, but the light held. Alara joined him, and the shield expanded, forcing the attackers back, and then the temple itself awakened. The walls sang, the symbols glowed, the sky split, and the hunters screamed as the bond reached into them and showed them what they could never control: love, choice, connection, not commands, not chains. The council ship cracked and vanished into dust, and the hunters fell to their knees, not in defeat, but in silence, understanding something ancient, something lost. When it was over, the temple faded slowly, returning to sleep, and Alara fell to the floor, exhausted. Jake caught her and held her close, whispering that it was over, that they had done it together. She looked at him with tears and said yes, but now nothing would be the same. The heart of the temple glowed with quiet power, and in its presence, Jake felt smaller than he ever had before. The bond inside him pulsed in rhythm with the code, and every breath he took felt like he was inhaling the memory of stars. He looked at Alara, her face lit by soft light, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with the weight of everything they had endured and everything they were about to face. She reached out her hand, and he took it, their fingers interlocking like pieces of the same story finally written together. The code did not speak in words. It spoke in truth and feeling, in light and time, and it asked only one question, not with voice, but through their bond. Do you accept the cost? Jake saw it then, all at once, not in a dream, not in a vision, but as a truth that filled every part of him. He saw what would happen if they completed the bond, truly completed it. He would no longer be fully human. His body, his thoughts, his presence would change, not in shape, but in essence. He would become something new, not of Earth, not of Xylan, but a creation born from both, a bridge between worlds, a keeper of balance. He looked into himself and saw every piece of his life, the sound of his sister's laughter, the smell of his mother's kitchen, the feeling of warm rain on his face, the weight of old dreams now left behind, and he knew that stepping forward meant letting go of the life he had once lived, not in regret, but in transformation. Ella felt it too, her memories, her fears, her lost home, all rose to the surface, and she turned to Jake and said only one word: choose. He closed his eyes and saw the faces of those who would never understand, the world that would forget his name, the future that would never hold his footsteps. And still he stepped forward, still he placed his hand on the code, still he said yes, not with his mouth, but with his soul. The temple responded at once. The light exploded into 1,000 colors, and the floor beneath them vanished, not falling, not breaking, but becoming something else, something infinite. The bond surged and wrapped around them, pulling their minds into one shared space where thought and time no longer mattered. Jake saw her entire life, every joy, every sorrow, every second of pain and defiance and love, and Alara saw his too, every tear, every step, every breath of hope. They shared everything without fear, without walls, without doubt. The code rewrote itself in their joined hands, and when the light faded, they stood not as they were, but as something new. Jake's skin no longer held the same light. It shimmered with threads of the code flowing like rivers under his skin. His voice, when he spoke, echoed with harmony, and his eyes held stars he had never seen. Alara stood beside him, her form calm and strong, her presence no longer hidden. No longer running, she was complete because he had chosen to stand with her, and the code had accepted them not as enemies, not as errors, but as the answer outside. The sky cracked again, and a storm of ships arrived, not guards, not hunters, but council ships, cold and perfect and silent, ready to destroy what they could not own. Jake walked out of the temple without fear, the new energy inside him flowing like a quiet tide. Alara followed, and together they faced the council, not with weapons, not with shields, but with truth. The ships opened, and the council stood waiting, their forms tall and proud and ancient, their eyes empty of warmth. They raised their hands to erase the temple and erase them too, but Jake raised his hand first, and the bond flared once more, not in attack, but in light, a light that reached into the minds of every council member and showed them not pain, not fear, but understanding. The bond was no longer something to be feared, it was something to be honored. One by one, the council members lowered their hands, not because they were defeated, but because they saw what they had lost, what they had forgotten, what they had denied for too long. The ships turned and vanished into the stars, and the sky cleared for the first time in many years, and the land beneath them pulsed with color, and the air tasted like life returning. Jake stood in silence, feeling the world shift around him, and Alara looked at him with tears that shimmered like crystal, and she said, "Thank you for choosing me when everyone else ran." And he answered, "I didn't just choose you, I chose us." They stayed in that world for a time, rebuilding, healing, teaching others that bonds were not chains, but bridges, that truth was not control, but choice, that love could be born even in the darkest places between the stars. Jake was no longer human, not in the way Earth defined it, but he was more than he had ever been, and in that truth he found peace. Their story became legend, whispered across galaxies, not as a warning, but as a promise that even in silence, even in shadow, light can rise when hearts choose each other without fear.